Good morning, everybody. Okay, welcome on this very chilly, slightly chilly morning with crazy parking. Thanks for coming. Thanks for making the effort for getting through that sort of last barrier. A bit smaller crowd than usual, but it's quite intimate, and we're all excited to hear a fantastic story from our speaker for April version of Our People, Their Stories, Oral Histories of Northern Tasmania, which is Keith Dougall. Dougall? That's the pronunciation? Sure. So I would like to take the opportunity to acknowledge that we meet today on unceded lands of Lutruwita, home to the Litamarina, Taranna Tapana and Pananina tribes from this Kanamaluka Valley. We acknowledge their ancestors and their future leaders as custodians of this country, its natural resources and a rich oral history, design and creative history and culture to which we owe a great deal. So I'll get Dr. Peter Henderson. He's on our committee of friends. He will introduce Keith's talk and Keith himself. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and again, brilliant to see people navigating the car park out there. When we planned this, by the way, we had no idea A, there would be an election coming up, nor that they would make that the pre-polling place. However, it really is my pleasure this morning to introduce Keith. I first met him when I had the real privilege of going up there and spending a fabulous day learning about glass blowing. Keith has established above the village the Poatina Glass Blowing Centre, which also includes silverwork and many other things. It's an absolutely wonderful place. It sits above Poatina village, which in itself is quite unique, and it nestles below the central tiers. A really dramatic place to learn about something like glassmaking, particularly as glassmaking is so elemental, the fire and all that sort of stuff. So Keith is a really accomplished artist, an educator and a community arts organiser. Recently he helped organise Ozglass's annual conference at Poatina. Ozglass is the national body for creative glassmakers, and it was indeed a major triumph, with participants from around the world, including one man who worked on the face of Big Ben, which is pretty neat, really. So please welcome this very accomplished and intelligent man, Keith Dougall.
Thank you, Peter. I guess you'll have to decide at the end whether I'm intelligent and accomplished, but thank you for that. And I too would like to acknowledge the lands that we are on and the lands that I live on at Poatina. Above us on the Great Western Tiers and the plateau we have the Big River Nation, and below us we have the Stony Creek Nation. I can't say the proper names because they're too hard for me to get my tongue around, but we're kind of on a borderland, and we enjoy a really nice strong relationship with some of the Aboriginal community and elders. Auntie Nettie Shaw came and welcomed us to country for our Ozglass conference, which was lovely to have her back again, and Lola Greeno also came and presented with her and had an exhibition with her beautiful shell necklaces as part of the conference, and Auntie Nettie had her kelp water carrier beautiful vessels in the gallery as well. So it's a beautiful place that I come from. And I also just wanted to acknowledge that we have an ex-Poatina person, Bev Marshall, sitting up the back there, who, when I first arrived to Poatina many years ago, back in 2002, Bev ran the shop. How many years, Bev, did you do that for?
1997 till 2012, and then the post office for about 5 years.
Yeah. So Bev was a key part of the community once Fusion, which is a national Christian youth and community organisation that does youth work all over Australia and also internationally. Bought the village from the Hydroelectric Commission in 1995, so that was a bit of a big deal. It had become a ghost town in the early 90s. The hydro didn't need all of that permanent accommodation that they thought they'd need because technology moved on and the power station was automated mostly. And so the whole village was put up for sale, and Fusion ran a number of youth programs and trained youth workers. We had a Certificate 4 in youth and community work and a diploma in youth and community work that was delivered there as a residential course for many years, and I came and did those courses in 2002, and that's how I started my Poatina journey. But that was 23 years ago, and I'm going to go a little bit further back because I noticed on the brief that I was invited to share a bit of my journey and some of the influences that have changed the course of my life. You know, I guess we all have those moments where somebody or something makes a difference and we go on a different path, and there's certainly been lots of those for me. Can you all hear me okay? You can't? Okay. All right. How about if I go a bit closer? Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
So just yell at me if I move away or if I'm mumbling or not helpful. So I've got a lot of slides, and a lot of them I will just flick through very quickly. So if you have any questions or if you want me to explain something a bit more, just pop your hand up or ask me to go back. But this is going right back. One of the first photos that maybe indicated that I might be on a path to become an artist. But there's always that other side of me that's happy to, lie in the sun on the beach as well. So it's a bit of a pull in both ways. This is a photo of my mum and dad. There won't be many family shots, don't worry. But recently, my father died. Trevor Dougall on the left there. He worked for the Department of Immigration in Canberra. He was a public servant and was often posted overseas and was posted in Rome and Italy and Hong Kong, to name just a few. And this was all before I was born. But I recently went home to Canberra. My mum's still alive. He died when I was 9. We had the 40th anniversary of his death. He died from cancer. And I discovered in conversation, looking through photo albums with my brother and sister, my brother shared something that he'd never shared with the family before. He's 10 years older than me. That we discovered that my dad actually worked undercover in Hong Kong and on his overseas postings for the Australian government. This is before ASIO existed. So I discovered that my dad was in effect a spy for the Australian government, and that this newspaper article, which was in a family album, was published in the Canberra Times. And if you read it, it's a bit of a nothing article. It says 2 public servants came back from their posting. And Glenn, my brother, said that article was because his cover was blown in Hong Kong and they had to come back urgently. And this article was published in the Canberra Times to let his pursuers know that he was no longer a threat in Hong Kong. So there's a little bit of trivia for you. But this is me at about age 11, and my brother, who's 10 years older than me. This is a garden pond that I started building in the backyard. I remember being a bit disappointed with my dad because one day he mentioned that he was going to build a garden pond, or maybe he was just musing, and I was really excited by that idea. And so after he died, a couple of years later, I decided to build a pond myself. And my mum sort of said, right, well, you can do it behind that tree in the backyard, and if it looks okay, we'll cut the tree down. And we used to go to church every Sunday And on the way home from church, I'd beg to go to the hardware store and get another bag of cement so that I could keep building the pond. But I was a bit of a quiet kid. I was taught many musical instruments. I learned the piano and the violin. I had singing lessons. I had music theory lessons. I think mostly because my mum was very passionate about music. And I might have shown some interest at one point, but that was enough to sort of be signed up to a lot of things. But I no longer pursue those. But I am grateful for that experience. I did sort of find that I didn't really feel like I had a normal childhood, because most afternoons after school, when kids would go off and play at their mate's place, I was offered a music lesson. And Saturday mornings I was at the orchestra, the Canberra Youth Orchestra, for 3 hours of rehearsals. So I did resent that a little bit, but that's what the pond looked like sort of a few years on. And then a few years later, when I was 16, I built this more formal pond in the front yard, which both are still there at my mum's house. She still lives in the same house. So my art journey, I think I grew up with a lot of my dad's attitudes towards art. I certainly didn't plan to be an artist by any means. And I remember conversations about blue poles and, abstract art and what a waste of money it was as I was growing up. And I think I probably, you imbibe a lot of the attitudes of your parents growing up, and I probably didn't have a very, I didn't value art and culture that much in our family, although there was a strange sort of paradox, because all of the music and also my mother was a prolific artist. She was a landscape painter. She did china painting, and one of my early memories was she didn't have a kiln to fire the paint onto the china, and so I used to have to take it in a shoebox up the road, 5 or 6 doors up the road, to a lady who did have a kiln. And there was always like a few 20-cent pieces in the bottom of the shoebox, which I don't imagine would have done much to cover the electricity, but that was my job, to take it up the road. And I remember looking into the kiln and being fascinated by it, but never imagining that I would be working with kilns and building kilns one day myself. I spent a lot of time as a kid on my own, walking the dog in the bush, because Canberra has a lot of bushland around its suburbs. So I had a lot of solitude and a lot of time to myself. I didn't find school easy, and yet I did enjoy certain subjects like woodwork, industrial arts. I was very good at those. I enjoyed them. Didn't really sort of think much about art, and at the end of year 10, when you're choosing your subjects for year 11 and 12, to be a bit more serious about where you might go, to uni or something afterwards, I remember I chose art as what I would have called a bludge subject, because I thought it would be easy. There were 2 art courses. One was a serious one that, would give you a score for your tertiary entrance ranking, and which had homework and assignments and things. And there was another one which was just a bit of a free ride. You could go in and muck around with, stuff, and there was no real homework or work to do. But what I didn't reckon on in choosing that, when the parent-teacher interviews came along, the head of the art department was my homeroom teacher, who did the parent-teacher interview for me. And she's an artist called Di Broomhall, still painting in Canberra. Anyway, she said to me, "What have you chosen that art course for? You should be doing the serious one. You'd be good at that." And so I got signed up on the spot with my mother there to go into the serious art course, which she taught, which had all the homework and the assignments. And it was probably the best thing that happened to me, actually, because she was the person that saw something in me. I wouldn't say I was very good at art. I wasn't very good at drawing. I wasn't a natural, if you like. But she asked me a question that no other teacher had asked me. And when I would do something, or you'd have these assignments where you had to go and basically copy an artwork or respond to it, is what she would say, visually, and actually make an artwork that was based on a master's artwork. And she would look at it and she'd say, "Did you enjoy that?" And I'd never been asked that before. And I had to say, yes, I did. I really did enjoy it, even though it was hard work. And I think I realised that I actually did come alive and I did enjoy these creative activities in this art course. And the other thing that I remember discovering, and because I was such a quiet kid and I didn't find it easy to sort of represent myself to others or say what I thought, I discovered that art was a way of communicating and a means of communicating ideas or getting ideas across. And so that was a revelation for me, that there was another way of finding a voice, if you like. So these are some of the artworks I did in that year 11 and 12 period. That's got a poem that I wrote around the outside that's very philosophical. I discovered this way of sort of painting on glass using a hairdryer and some tempera paints, basically watercolour paints, and pushing it around with a hairdryer. Very low tech, but there was something about the pure colour of it that I really loved, and the teacher was very encouraging. And I remember this is a sand picture that I created for one of my final Year 12 projects, and the symbolism of colour. And so I enjoyed looking up what all the different colours meant in different nations and traditions and cultures, and being able to sort of create a diorama of what I was wanting to communicate through these colours. That was quite a revelation for me. And I remember there was a school holiday break, and this teacher was in the art room, and she said, "Do you want to take this stuff home and use it during the holidays, like art materials and things?" And she was sort of handing me packets of pastels and paints, and I was feeling a bit, she's not doing this for anyone else. Why is she giving me all this stuff? And then anyway, she gave me this big block of breeze block to carve, and she said, "Do you want this? You can take it home and carve it." And I remember trying to make a cockatoo or something out of it and gave up within half an hour when I got home. But as we were loading this big block of stone into the car to take home for the holidays, she looked at me in the eyes and she said, "You're an artist." And it was just a moment that stuck with me, and I don't think I really took it on at the time. I probably just felt a bit embarrassed and shrugged it off. But I've often thought back to that moment and thought, well, I wonder what she was seeing in me. I really appreciated her. So this is the Canberra School of Art where I trained. So at the end of Year 12, I had a bit of a dilemma because my parents, my mum at that stage, because Dad was no longer around, my mum was an artist, but she had an attitude about art school because only weirdos went to art school, and drug addicts and people like that, with weird hair and dreadlocks and things like that. And so the people in her art class were saying, "Don't let him go to art school. Don't let him go to art school." And so there was this part of me that was interested, but didn't feel permission to pursue that. And so when it came time to choose what uni courses you'd apply for, I had to apply for the Bachelor of Arts in something or other that might get me a real job one day. And I knew I had the grades for that. I did very well at school. But there was another part of me on the uniforms that decided to apply for the Canberra School of Art. of course, I wasn't serious about it, and I said to my mum, I'm just going to go to the interview for the experience of it. If they say yes, I won't go. I'll do the other course. And that's what I did. Anyway, I did absolutely no portfolio preparation. I didn't worry about it. I literally woke up on the morning of the interview and thought, oh my goodness, what should I do? So I put on my best shirt and I shaved and I grabbed everything that I'd made in year 12 and shoved it in a box and drove to the art school. And when I got there, they gave me some butcher's paper and said, go into this room and draw, and then go into the next room and draw. And there was a life model, a male nude life model in the middle of the first room, and I freaked out and kept walking to the next room, which was the still life room. And I stayed in there for 2 hours, too scared to walk back out through the room with the naked man in it, until my interview time, and turned up at the glass workshop you had to actually go to the part of the school where the glass workshop was, and be interviewed. And of course I just pulled everything out of the box, and I think they just thought I was an interesting kid. And of course they said, if only 4 people a year get to do that course. It was very, very small workshop, and very hard to get into. I discovered later, I had no idea. And they asked me, who's your favourite glass artist? And I didn't know there was such a thing. And I just looked at them blankly, and I'd seen a little exhibition of the graduates' work from the previous year in the next room just before I went into my interview, and I remembered the name of one of the students, Liz Kelly. And I said, oh, Liz, I really like Liz Kelly's work. So I had no idea, and I didn't even know that they offered glass blowing as part of the course. I had not seen anything, whereas everyone else have been trying for years to get in. And I've known people who've had a background in stained glass and brought beautiful work to get into that school and were rejected because they were seen as having brought too much convention with them, and they wanted people with a fresh, clean slate. And I think that's probably what I was. So anyway, Klaus Moyer is a very famous glass artist in the Australian and international glass world, and he set up the workshop in Canberra at the ANU there in the 80s. This is some examples of his work. He fuses sheet glass, strips of sheet glass together, and then slumps them into sometimes 3-dimensional forms like this. That's actually a dish, but his work is incredible and world-renowned, and in some ways he's considered the father of modern glass in what he introduced to the studio glass movement. I was actually present in one of the years that I was there when these were blown by an American glass blower who assisted, picking up fused plates that Klaus had fused in the kiln to make blown 3-dimensional versions of his work. These are some of the wall pieces that he did later in his life, which were quite incredible, and I encourage you to look him up. He interviewed me, but he was retiring that year, and so I never was taught by him, but he actually offered me my first glass job, which was to cut his stripes, as he called them. He had a very thick German accent, and he didn't say strips, he said stripes. And so each little strip of colour there, it was cut from a sheet, and I had to cut them 8mm wide from a sheet about this long. I'd get 10 sheets at a time, and then I'd have to cut them into strips this like with a glass cutter and some running pliers, and I had to keep all of the ones that I broke and give them to him as well, because he used those as well. But sometimes the pile of broken ones was bigger than the ones that were right, and I was very embarrassed, but he was very good about it. This is a quote that I found that kind of sums up Klaus's approach, and this was a speech that he made to the first set of graduating students when he set up the workshop in 1986. I started in 1992. But it's the whole School of Art in Canberra is based on the Bauhaus model of separate workshops, and it's more of an apprenticing sort of model. So you're living and breathing in a workshop studio where you're being apprenticed to the students above you and to your teachers, and you're learning from them. So I was in the studio pretty much 4 days a week. There was only 1 day of lectures and tutorials a week. So not too much theory, mostly practical. And I just loved it. Stephen was the new head of workshop, Stephen Proctor, from the UK. Incredible man. He's sadly, both Klaus and Stephen are no longer with us. Stephen died in 2001, quite tragically from cancer, when he was still quite young. But this is some of his work that I was exposed to in my years at Canberra. And Liz McClure was my glassblowing teacher. She was a Scottish, Elizabeth McClure. She now lives in New Zealand. But I can remember when things used to break and fall on the floor, and she'd say, "Oh, you couldn't have break it, you couldn't have make it." And she was basically saying if glass didn't break, you wouldn't be able to get anything off the pipe, because you need it to break off once you've finished it, where you want it to break, not right through the middle of the piece. So, used to go to bed hearing her saying, "Turn, turn, turn," because you're always having to turn the pipe, and you just hear her voice constantly. So, those 4 years of my life, I often look back at and think of were just incredible, because for a little quiet kid who went to an all-boys Catholic school and life wasn't very fun or exciting, to suddenly be in an environment where everyone accepted you as you were and saw creativity and difference as an asset rather than something to be bullied or teased out of you, and didn't care whether you played sport or whether you were good at anything like that. Suddenly I was in heaven and learning all of these practical skills. In my family growing up, I had a reputation as the destroyer because I would find things under the house or in the cupboard, like slide projectors or appliances, and I would deconstruct them and make something new out of them, which drove my parents crazy. Anyway, that's a picture of me when I was at the art school arranging some glass strips on a corrugated mould, and in the background there is a very young Tom Moore. I don't know if any of you know Tom Moore's work, but he's a very famous Australian glass artist now, and he actually came and taught one of the workshops at Ausglass recently. That's one of my first paperweights that I ever made, very, very humble little flower, and not the goblet in the background. That was a 4th year student on the same plinth, but these 3 little blobs at the front there were some of the first bits of hot glass that I produced back in 1992 or 93. Another, you might know this fellow, Dale Chihuly. He's probably the most famous glass artist in the world. He's very, very good at getting himself out there, and there's a fantastic retrospective of his work in the Adelaide Botanic Gardens at the moment. If you get the chance to see, is well worth seeing. He is a very out there artist and has done installations all over the world, and so I just popped that in because I think being young at art school and knowing about him had an effect, and seeing some of the work that he did, putting glass in outdoors and in Jerusalem in ruins, and beautiful chandeliers, using Venetian techniques. These are some of the kinds of things that I produced when I was at art school. So I started weaving with glass, and I was very interested in. So you saw me arranging strips on a corrugated plaster mould in that shot with Tom Moore. So I started pulling canes and colouring them with very fine differences in colour, and weaving them together. And there was a postgraduate student called Maria Tomoko from New Zealand in the studio at that time, and she taught me a Maori weaving technique that I used to weave these rods of glass together, and they would actually roll up. So you can see at the bottom there, it can actually roll up. It's like a piece of fabric in some ways. That was another one a little bit later on. They look a bit three-dimensional, but they're actually flat. It's more of an optical illusion. So that's probably about 1.5 metres long and about this wide. Yeah. It's a detail of the Maori weaving. So that's actually lead core nylon cased trawling line that I dyed into different colours to weave the things together. This one is called The Process of Pain, and for me this was about the idea of something difficult happening, the spike at the top, and the layers that of effect that it has on you or someone, and then a cast bowl at the bottom, which was made out of the offcuts of the canes cast into a solid bowl. And the idea was that in that bowl was something precious that comes out of those difficult experiences. That was the basic idea I was trying to convey. Again, it's flat. It looks three-dimensional, but it's flat. It's a close-up. You can see there's some light coming through the bowl there and the little offcuts that make it up. I also did a lot of fusing of canes together, so joining them together in the kiln into a flat sheet and then slumping them onto a curved mould. So I really enjoyed just the pure colour of glass and being able to change that by varying how much colour I put in the canes and then choosing how I arranged the canes. So I guess quite inspired by Klaus and his practice, but he didn't make his own glass. He bought sheet glass from the Bullseye Glass Company in America and cut it up, whereas I felt like I wanted to be able to use the transparency and vary that colour myself. So at the end of my 4 years there, I did an honours thesis about a collaborative approach to visual art and glass in architecture. So I called that the ultimate point, and that was inspired by this quote that I found in a book about a German stained glass artist, Ludwig Schaffrath, who's a very famous, has done incredible windows throughout Europe, in cathedrals and amazing buildings. This quote just stood out to me, and I think one of the things that I always struggled with as a young artist was making objects to go in a gallery never quite hit the spot for me. I really do enjoy it, and I totally respect that, but there was always this part of me that wanted to know where my artwork was going to end up and to know the context for it. And so I was very attracted to art and glass in architecture or in the environment, in the built environment, public art, etc. And so I did a lot of research in that, and for my final project, I did this commission. Well, it was a kind of a collaboration at my local Baptist church that I went to, which taught me a lot about working with committees and things, and politics, and was one of the first big projects that I say, in inverted commas, nearly killed me. But yeah, these are all bigger canes, and they're suspended on stainless steel cables in a matrix of cables in front of what was a new baptistry area at the front of the church. So there's like a pool for baptisms just in front of that. And this new window was going to be created, so they made a new corner at the front of the church. And a lady came up to me and said, "Oh, you're doing glass at art school. Could you do a little stained glass window piece for the new baptistry window?" And I said, "Well, I don't do stained glass, and how little does it have to be?" I think she had in mind, something like this that would hang on a chain. And I was looking for something meaty that I could get my teeth into. And so I managed to convince them to let me do my final year project there. And that you can see sort of the cables there. And I developed this whole technique and had to work out how to bend these big canes hot in the glass blowing studio. And it was quite challenging, and I documented the whole process as part of this thesis, and I interviewed a lot of architects and artists, and was really looking for artists and architects who'd work together rather than building a building and saying, right, we're going to find a piece of art to put here in the foyer. Somebody who wanted to integrate that more and actually design together. That's what really excited me. And there was a very hip architect at the time by the name of Rick Bizawi, who I believe now lives in Swansea, Tasmania, but he was building aquatic centres and things in Melbourne, and I remember going down and interviewing him and trying to get my head around how all of this worked. So when I left art school, I started living on a little farm, and I was looking for a place to set up my studio, and Fusion, who I mentioned, bought Poatina back in 1995, was operating some programs on a little farm called Youth Haven, just near the Murrumbidgee River on the outskirts of Canberra. And I ended up working as a lead tenant in a housing service for young people with them for about 5 years after I left uni. And I was able to set up my first studio in an old dairy on that same property. So this is a shot. I couldn't find many shots of me, so it's not a great photo, but I lined the old dairy and built these tables, and I built a kiln. This is a big architectural glass kiln that could slump big panels, you know, about 2 metres wide and 1.2 metres long, and that whole lid of it lifts up and reveals like a bed of sand. Well, there wasn't always sand in it, but sometimes I had sand in it, and I was able to carve wet sand into patterns and shapes and then place window glass on top and slump it into patterns. So this was a residence, a friend of mine commissioned me to do his front doors. So that was a Celtic design that he wanted. And then St Mark's Theological College commissioned me to do some slumped glass windows for their chapel. So that's the Centre for Christianity on the shores of Lake Burley Griffin. And it was a beautiful slate stone chapel that looks out towards the lake. And then a few years later, sorry, it's a funny story, but I had all these great concepts and I did all of these sketches and things, and then I showed the head of the theological college, and he's like, "That's not what we want." And he said, "We just want some crosses." And he drew some sketches, you know, just drew some crosses on the pieces of paper, and so I gave him crosses. So that was, you learn things along the way. Sometimes you just got to give people what they want. In a strange sort of way, it was a very, it suited the place, and it was probably the right thing. A few years later on, they redid the chapel and they needed new front doors, and so they asked me to do a new commission. These were folding doors, and they're toughened glass, so they've been strengthened after they've been fired, and so many of them blew up in the toughening process that I ended up doing it about 3 times, I think, but that's another story. So this is based on a big Celtic knot, and it's about the Holy Spirit, and it's about different paths that people came to their theological college and went out. And I've always been very much interested in community. That's just a detail of the kinds of textures in the glass. So it's relief, you know. It's probably, when you feel it, you know, there's a good centimetre or so of texture in some places. So I started teaching young people in my studio, and this was probably my first experience of teaching. There was a program for young people happening on the same property, not run by Fusion, but run by another community organisation, and it was basically a day school for kids that didn't fit into mainstream school. And we've since had a similar school called Capstone College up in Poatina, and they're kids that often are on the autism spectrum or have very difficult family backgrounds or have been abused, had horrific life experiences, and they can't function in a mainstream school setting, and they need more one-on-one creative, not just classroom style education. And so that's where I learned to teach. And this is my little furnace. So I used to think it was a bit like R2-D2, so I built a little furnace. As part of my course at uni, I was given the opportunity to learn how to build kilns and furnaces, which I loved. I loved all of the making of the tools and the machinery that was required and the technical side of glass. So you can see a little, it's like an oil can on its side lined with insulation where we heat the pipes on the left, and then the furnace, which has a crucible inside that holds about 10 kilos of molten glass, that stays on 24/7 when you're using it. So I would run it for a few weeks at a time, and I would have just enough molten glass to do like half a day or a day, and then I would have to load it and melt overnight to work the next day. The rubbish bin on its side is called a glory hole. It's a reheating chamber that I lined with insulation, and had to convince the gas company to hook me up to the gas. They were a bit dubious about this young fellow that wanted to hook things up that looked like, stills and whatnot with coils of copper. And, I had a bit of a fight on my hands just to sort of get people to take me seriously. But you can see this is with that equipment running, the glory hole on the right, the furnace. This is a young fellow. His name was Ivan, and I taught him how to blow glass. There, and you can see the kiln in the background. It's a very small space, but it was a good start. And then back to the School of Art, I was invited to teach their sub-major program. So I became a lecturer one day a week at the glass workshop where I trained, which was a real privilege to go back there. And while I was sort of teaching, this is around 2000, 2001, I was given a scholarship to go to a prestigious glass school called Pilchuck Glass School in America. And I don't know if it was actually started by Dale Chihuly, with the guy with the patch over his eye that I showed you earlier, and a number of other prominent American glass artists who, the early photos of this glass school, they had tents and a furnace in the middle of a paddock with horses grazing next to it, and I think they smoked a lot of dope, and it was a very 70s kind of artist experience. But it's evolved into this beautiful architect-designed log cabin sort of structures. This is the famous hot shop on the right, which is where the glass blowing happens. And I attended a class with Paul Marioni, a very famous American glass artist, in architectural glass, cast architectural glass. So these are some of the original tree houses and dwellings that the artists who started Pilchuck built in trees and things, and they're still there, and they used to sort of just build their own cubbies and things to go there each year in the summer. It's in the middle of a tree farm in Washington State, just below the Canadian border, and it looks out over Puget Sound. So this is the cold shop where you do all the glass grinding and polishing. It's just a beautiful campus, and the experience of community is incredible. This is the lodge, which is like the big mess hall where you'd have all your meals together and do slide talks in the evenings. So what I experienced there as a young artist was mind-blowing for me. Being in community. Community was always really important to me, like even as a young fellow growing up in a little church. I remember our little church closed down when I think I was probably about 12 or something like that, and I just couldn't understand why they were just stopping it, because I loved the lunches together and all the community activities and hanging out with my friends. And so I think I just sort of grew up with that communal sense and discovered that similar sort of experience in being here for 3 weeks with a bunch of other artists and being able to develop work. I did these drawings in my journal while I was over there, which I then had the opportunity to engrave on glass printmaking plates and then print on paper. And I think for me, these images represented how I was feeling. When I arrived, I felt very fragmented and very unsure, and it was kind of like there was no alignment. But as I sort of went through the week and got to know people, as we do when we enter groups and build that sense of community together, I felt like there was alignment, and I felt like we were going in the same direction. And for me, these were like little fragments of body, soul and spirit, parts of me that were sort of coming together and finding their way. But they're also a picture of community, and I think communities can be fragmented, or they can be, healthy and vibrant, and with shared understandings that help you go somewhere, or they can be pulling in opposite directions and hard work. And I'm sure you've all experienced both kinds. So this is some shots of me in Pilchuck gathering glass out of their massive furnace behind here, and then trimming. This is a fellow called Dan Friday, he was a young person who was just here to help. But he's now a very famous Indigenous American glass artist that we almost had as our keynote for Ozglass, but then he hurt his back and didn't come. But so ladling these. So I was trying to make those shapes in glass, those drawings. And I worked so hard trying to get the rings, to get those lines. And I was carving wax and then pushing it into sand mould. So you push objects into sand to create like a cavity in wet sand, and then you pour glass into it. And we soot the sand to stop it, like use acetylene to make a carbon layer to stop the glass sticking. And there was an accident that happened where I burnt. So I was trying to cast them all in one pour, which is what you normally do with a big ladle of glass. But I couldn't get these lines that I wanted in the glass. And anyway, one day, right at the end of the 3 weeks, I was trying again, and I'd poured that much glass in, and I burnt my hand. The glove had a hole in it, and I had to put the ladle down and run off and run my hand under cold water. And when I came back a couple of minutes later, the glass had gone a bit cold. It was no longer glowing, and the teacher, Paul Marioni, said, "Oh, why don't you gather on that?" And you wouldn't normally do that. It wasn't the done thing. Pour on that, put another ladle of hot glass on it. And so I did, and guess what? Gave me my lines, and it was just the answer. So sometimes injury is necessary, and these were the only 2 pieces that I got that I liked out of that 3-week experience. And I had to just go home knowing I'd solved the problem but hadn't really made the work that I wanted to make, which involved making lots of them. But I did get the chance down the track, and I'll show you a bit in a moment. One of the things that we also got the opportunity to do, Paul Marioni ordered a semi-trailer load of ice blocks, like massive ice blocks, and wanted us to have the experience of doing a public art project without having to make all of the glass and for it to be at scale. And so we cut up, he knew what size the ice was going to be, the blocks, and so he cut up some little blocks of wood to make a little marquette. And we all had goes in the class of trying out different designs on the table for what it could be, and we were going to all together make one art piece out of these ice blocks. And so late at one night I just made this pattern out of the blocks and then thought nothing of it and went to bed, and the next morning we all came in and everyone had decided that was it. And so it was actually my design that got made, which was pretty thrilling for me. And we documented it all, and there was an architect in the group who brought lights, and there's a lot more photos of us with multicolour neon, but I won't bore you with that. But something really life-changing happened to me in somebody that I met while I was there, this lady called Lotta Soda. She's a Swedish glass artist, and she was just part of the class. And we got to know each other, and we realised we had some things in common, and we were sort of sharing some of our dreams for art and our life. And I had this dream in my studio in Canberra of creating an arts community and having artists come and use my studio and adding on to the studio and expanding it on this little property. And I didn't quite know how to do it, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. I felt I needed fellowship or community with other artists to be able to be at my best, because it's pretty lonely working on your own in a studio, trying to motivate yourself to do art, and there's always other distractions. Anyway, when I shared this vision or idea, dream with Lotta, she said to me, that's a really important dream. You should do that. And her encouragement made the difference. And in a funny sort of way, so I wasn't married to Anita at the time, but my wife that I am married to now was studying in Poatina with Fusion, doing the Youth and Community course. And she was learning a lot. And she was telling me over the phone some of the things she was learning, and really sort of foundational life skills, I guess. And I was at the same time attracted and repelled, because it sounded like hard work and having to work on yourself and grow internally to get through this course, and also learning about community and living with others and how that worked. And so when Lotta said, you really should do that, there was something inside me that clicked and said, actually, you need to go to Poatina and you need to do that course, because you need to sort yourself out a bit and learn some stuff before you can move on to sort of working on that vision of a community of artists. And so, and Lotta ended up coming to Poatina for a whole year, a few years later, as an artist in residence, which was when that photo was taken. But this is a shot of the mountains you can see Poatina on the little hill at the foot there. So we're on a spur of the Great Western Tiers, that's Mount Blackwood behind. And in the winter time, these photos were taken way back then. It was, we've got a golf course, and it's quite a beautiful outlook. It can be cold though, but it certainly wasn't as cold as Canberra. While I was studying in Poatina, so I rented my studio out to some artists in Canberra for a year while I sort of tested this idea out to come down to Poatina. And actually, a few years before, when Fusion first bought the village, the director of Fusion, a fellow by the name of Mel Garvin, who some of you may have heard on the radio years ago, he invited me to set up my studio in Poatina, because they were looking for sort of tourist attraction kind of things. And I laughed at him. I said, why would I want to go to Tasmania? Because there was a really vibrant glass community in Canberra. And we were also, I was involved in feasibility studies for the Canberra Glassworks. So there wasn't really a facility for graduates of the Canberra School of Art to go and have furnaces and kilns to use. And so one of the students in my year, a lady called Leonore Allen, she had this idea of a centre for glass and light, and she invited us all round to her parents one evening to talk about this idea. And that is now the Canberra Glassworks. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's well worth visiting. It's a world-class glass institution on the lake in Canberra, and it was an $11 million facility when it was built and opened in 2008. And I was on the steering committee for that and helping shape that, and before I moved to Poatina. So I sort of laughed at Mal when he said, come and start your studio in Tasmania, and I'd seen the photos of Poatina with the overgrown grass and, the swimming pool that looked like nobody had swum in it forever, and I thought, no, I'm not going there. But that's what happened. I came down and studied, and in my first year, I don't know if you remember this picture of the house, but the Canberra bushfires happened in 2003, in January 2003, and that house where I still had stuff stored, that lead tenant service ended up being this. So I still had all my studio there, and I'd made plans to bring it all down and set it up in Poatina in the February. I booked a shipping container to load it all into, but sadly my kiln and my furnace and everything was destroyed in the bushfires. And you can see just on the left here, that's a close-up of window glass running down the bricks. And I know what temperature that glass melts at, and it's over 1,000 degrees. So I didn't live through that, but I know that people were horrified by that experience. And I was invited to be part of an exhibition of artists who were affected by those bushfires, and pretty much everyone else in the exhibition did experience the fire, whereas I was the only one who didn't. And this was my chance to make the work that I didn't make in Pilchuck. And so I got to make this piece, and it's based on actually a verse out of I'm not sure, I think it's from John's Gospel in the Bible. Unless the seed falls to the ground and dies, it remains a single seed, but if it dies, it can become many seeds. And for me, that became a metaphor of letting go of my little furnace, which held 10 kilos of glass, because it was relatively intact, and I could have saved it and brought it down, but I just had this sense as we were sifting through the wreckage that it was the right thing to let it go. And there was this promise that I felt that it would, one day I'd have a bigger furnace. I didn't know how that was going to happen, but it certainly has happened. And so that's what this was about. And so, and I still remember a comment one lady made when she came to the exhibition. She said, I just need to tell you what I experienced from your artwork. She said, because all of the paintings on the wall were images of the fire and the destruction and the blackness and the soot and the heat. And she said, all of this, it's all hot, 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 hot. And, she was kind of saying traumatic, She said, but this is like big raindrops cooling everything down. And it was just a really lovely moment where she'd sort of seen that because I hadn't lived through it and I brought something else, that it was a really nice kind of cooling down of all of that other stuff. And you can see there's some text, little charcoal lettering just below some of the, and I got them laser cut little wooden letters, and then I torched them and scorched them. And this black sand is actually foundry sand that's been through many, many fires, and then the glass on top. How are you going? You still with me? I feel like I'm talking a lot. Do you need to shake? I hope I'm not sending you to sleep, but a few years later, this isn't in sequence now, but I got to go back to Pilchuck and I got to make a 3-dimensional rendition of working with these pieces using a different casting technique, which I won't bore you with the technical details, but it was a very different method of working. That's looking out over Puget Sound. When I finished my youth and community course after that first year in Poatina, I was invited by Mal again, who's a man of big ideas. Sadly, he's died recently. But I was invited. We had this big reunion of hydro families. So it was a Back to Poatina Day, and Bev would remember this. A massive day where 5,000 people came to our little village, which normally has 100 or 200 people, and it was a lot of months in the planning, and Mal wanted a monument to the people of Poatina, past, present and future, including all the migrant workers that worked on the hydro scheme. many of whom came on this day. And so another chance for me to do a big project. And so I think poor Mel probably, again, had something very small in mind, but I like a challenge, and then I regret it later. But we had to put a tent up to... so we actually made towers out of recycled... So we built a big... This is the footings for a big pool. And then in the pool, it was a fountain, and so we cast recycled glass bricks out of ordinary bottles, you know, and jam jars. And so we had to... It was in the middle of winter leading up to this event, and we had to put a circus tent over the site to get it warm enough for the glue to join these bricks together, and it was a nightmare. So you can see that's actually, I think on the right is Anita, my wife. We had, you know, young people studying at the course at the time, helping glue all of these towers together, and it was a massive, massive undertaking. Collecting the glass, washing the bottles, crushing the glass, firing the glass, cutting the glass bricks on a diamond saw, gluing the bricks together, all the engineering and the water side of it, and that's how it ended up on that site. And this is taken from above, and this triangular platform was symbolic of all the different pathways from all over the world that people had come to Poatina, because we had international students quite regularly from all over the world, from all different continents, coming and studying our course, and they would go back out to their nations as well and start fusion centres and do youth work all over the world. So yeah, Poatina was actually a model of what a community could do for itself, and they were using that model elsewhere. And so, yeah, we used all different ruined slabs of concrete and crushed brick and indigenous rock from the area, and we planted, you know, native plants. And yeah, there's a bushfire on the mountain the day that I took this, but ignore the smoke. But you can see the bricks. They kind of look like stone, almost ceramic by day. And if you see down the bottom, there's like a concrete sort of section. So there's water bubbling up at the top of each tower and draining over the bricks. And down the bottom was like bits of crockery from, you know, old plates and cups that I found, and tin cans and things. And that's what it looked like at night. So we lit the towers. And so, you know, it was kind of symbolic of the ordinary people that built the hydro scheme, but they did some really extraordinary things. And though, you know, some of the stories are incredible, and you're probably aware of some of those. Yeah, so I love that idea of lots of components, and the fact that it's ordinary, everyday Vegemite jars and Coke bottles and beer bottles and wine bottles that went into making this artwork, but, you know, it can be transformed by light to show how extraordinary those ordinary things are. This is my young family of many years ago. I'm focusing mostly on my art practice, so I just thought I'd mention that I did have a growing family at the time, and I also made some smaller pieces using that recycled glass technique. And then around the time that I was building the monument for Poatina, I was invited to, I'd been asking, can I build a studio? And there wasn't really a great space up there. There was a little old pottery studio near the shop that they've used to run, but it was a very small space. It was the old butchery, and I needed somewhere bigger. And Mal said to me, well, we'll build a shed. Your budget's $10,000. And I think he probably thought, you know, a double carport, you know, like just a shed or something, like a garage or something like that. And I thought to myself, right, I'm going to find the biggest shed I can find for $10,000. Bev's laughing. But anyway, I found out that the North-Esk Rowing Club building, which some of you may remember used to be over on the shore of that way, near Young's Veggie Shed, sort of over that way. They'd been told by the council they had to shift over to near Bunnings there, and they were on the wrong side of the levee bank and all that sort of stuff. And anyway, to cut a long story short, we gutted the building and I wanted an iconic building. I wanted something that people would remember, a bit like the Pilchuck hot shop, you know. Everyone remembers that shape. And I was looking for something similar, and so we got the help of a demolition builder, and I actually nearly got arrested in the process because it's another whole story, but you can ask me about it later if you're interested. We were told there was a demolition permit, but there wasn't. And so the council got very upset and ordered us to stop work just as we brought the whole building down. Anyway, and we brought all these curved beams up to Poatina, and some of the young people that were studying at the time helped us unload, and then we've got, you know, local artists helping us restore all of these beams. Oops, we've gone into automatic mode. Oops. This took many years, and we started applying for grants, and it's another whole long story. But in the end, before we could even get the funding to build the new art centre and glass studio, we did get one small grant from Arts Tasmania, but we were going to lose it if we didn't use it. So we had to build a furnace, and we had to build a temporary studio. This is Mayor Kim Polly at the time, cutting the ribbon with a blowtorch to our temporary studio, and this is the opening of that space. And so we had a temporary studio. This is one of the first workshops that we had young people in the village learning to blow glass, and it was great fun. And during that time, the Tasmanian Craft Fair rang us up and said, "We heard you've got a glass blowing furnace, and we'd like glass blowing at our craft fair this year. It's the International Year for Glass, and it's our 30th anniversary, and can you just bring it over, please?" And I said, "Oh, I don't think you understand. We just spent $12,000 getting the plumber to plumb it all in, and you can't just pick it up and move it. It weighs tons." And I said, "If you were serious about that, you'd get someone to build one on a proper trailer and design it to be mobile and everything like that." And of course, 2 weeks later, they rang up and said, "Could you build us one on a trailer?" And I was stupid enough to say yes. So they provided some funding, and we raised money, and this is partway through building that. And then some of you may recognise James Dodson, helped us demonstrate glass blowing this is 2009, and we did 10 years of glass blowing demonstrations on that trailer at Deloraine over the coming years. So I'll just flick through. And then eventually we got to erect the building. That's another whole story again, which I won't go into. So that's pretty much what it looked like when we'd finished. And this is some years on what the inside looks like. So we've got artist booths along the right, so like desks that artists like myself and others living in the village can rent a space. And we've got the furnace, that cylindrical thing in the middle there, and glory holes. And it's quite a beautiful space, and it looks out on the mountains. And we taught young people there as well. We had Capstone College. We had our summer schools running. This is kiln form glass workshops being taught there. These are some of the students from Capstone College learning to blow glass. And one of the things that I really discovered in Canberra all those years ago was, young people today have very short attention spans, and to get them off their phones long enough, to stop them walking away from an activity, 2 or 3 minutes in is very, very difficult for these kids. the thing with hot glass is once you've gathered the glass on the end of your pipe, you can't stop turning the pipe because it'll fall off. And it's exciting and it's a little bit dangerous, and there's heat, and you're paying very close attention because you're worried about your own safety as much as anything. And so it's a fantastic youth work tool, because some of these kids that can't spend any more than a couple of minutes focusing on something, we're spending 45 minutes, finishing and completing something that they really couldn't do before. And I remember some people who knew some of these kids walking in and going, I tried to do a mindfulness exercise with somebody like this. The exercise was to eat a Snickers bar and to chew on it and concentrate on the experience. That was the goal for some of these young people, to get through a 2-minute exercise. But he said, you just did something with them for an hour. That's incredible. So it's, and we've also got a silversmithing area up the back, and you can see they made their own jewellery. So I can only work with one person at a time in the glass blowing area. So while others were waiting, they would do silver. I also completed some more public art commissions. So this is working in a kiln similar to the one I lost in the bushfires. We've had some big kilns donated to us, thankfully, and a different sort of sand in the bottom, a better technique that I learned, marking out reeds. This is for Montrose Bay High School, so placing glass onto the sand after I've made a pattern in the sand, and then heating that up in the kiln to slump the glass, and then it became a screen. So this is down on the banks of the Derwent River, just at Montrose Bay High School. And you can see there were clear glass panes set at right angles in between the slumped ones. So there were 52 slumped panels. And depending on where you stood, you could see through to the river or go beyond. These are some of the other bigger artwork projects that I've done. This is probably my most high profile, I guess, piece in a public building in Tasmania at Royal Hobart Hospital, and we installed that just as COVID hit. That was a huge project, and so there's the breath of about 320 people. It's called Catching Your Breath, and if you'd like to know more, there's a website, catchingyourbreath.net.au, that documents how we made this. And I don't know that we'll have time. I've gone over, haven't I? I won't show you the video, but there is a great making video on there. I'll just quickly flick through. This is a young person that was assisting us to make these, and another young artist from Adelaide that came to help. And then we got people in the hospital to blow their breath in with a straw, and we sealed their breath in, and we documented all their stories and their names with photos on the website. And there's some videos about some people who donated their breath, including some Aboriginal community members as well, which was really great to be able to do. And it was an incredible experience, because I'm interested in community and not just creating a pretty artwork that people just go, what a waste of money that was when they walk past. I really wanted the community to be involved in the process, and so that was a way of. It was a community engagement project alongside the making of the artwork, and the idea is that people would feel that they've been part of it, and kids can come and say, Granny's breath's up there, or there were people who'd literally just had a baby and came and blew their breath in, and for them that was something to remember the birth of their child. And there were others who only had a week or two to live who blew their breath in, and that was really special for them as well. This is making, putting it all together, and then the nerve-wracking hoisting it all up. So this is before they were hoisted up. Yeah. That's just another shot of the studio. And more recently, this is just last year now, I did this next project for Donate Life, and it's also in Royal Hobart Hospital, but completely unrelated, and they're very near each other in the reception area. So this is filled with small glass bubbles that were going to have breath in them, but thanks to COVID, that didn't happen. But this is stainless steel figures that I made out of stainless steel rod, which I thought would take me about 6 months, but ended up taking about 2 or 3 years to get complete. Very difficult to do. Very intricate and very hard working with a human figure, and not just curving the rods into the pattern, but also curving them into the shape of the body. And figurative work is not my strength, I have to say. So it was a very big learning curve. This was opened in May last year, so about a year ago. And it was a memorial sculpture for families who'd been affected by organ and tissue donation. It was called Gift of Life, and it was about transferring life. But also, one figure was mostly green on the left, and one was mostly blue, and some of the green was making its way into the blue as a symbol of new life, and some of the blue, which was a symbol of peace and hope, was making its way into the green figure. So the idea that there's an exchange happening, not just a one-way thing. So, and I'll just finish with a few slides from the AusGlass conference. So this was a workshop with Andrea Spencer, who's a flamework glass artist from Ireland. So we had pre-conference workshops. That's Andrea, second from the right. She does beautiful seaweed forms, just exquisite. And this is during the conference itself. We had the glass trailer on the right there, across from our community hall where we had the lectures. We had about 170 people. This was the fellow that Peter referred to, John Rentians, who did the clock face of Big Ben. He's an incredible stained glass artist who, very, very interesting person. We had artists and young, right, all ages from all around Australia, and quite a few internationals as well. Had a bit of a bushfire in the area at the time, so it was a bit smoky. But we had demonstrations on the trailer as well as in the studio, and so people came and blew in the lunch times and made things, and sometimes they ended up on the floor. So lots of young artists sort of. Our goal was to show Poatina off as a destination for artists and residents, and people really fell in love with the place. We had an exhibition of members' work, so the old school building became a gallery, and we filled 2 rooms with glasswork from all around the country, and then we had lots of big demonstrations up in the art centre in the glass studio. So you can see this is, forgotten his name, an Adelaide artist working in a team of about 6 or 8 people. This is Hamish Donaldson helping assist. He's actually coming for an artisan residency with his family today in Poatina. So we've got 4 artisan residents arriving today in Poatina. And they made these big box forms. So that's actually really hot, that box. And then they joined 2 boxes together. So you can see they're joining them hot, which is very hard to do. And, trying to keep that all hot and not let it get too cold. If it gets too cold, it'll crack and just break off. And, putting it away into the oven to cool down. This is Mark Elliott, a flame work glass artist, do a demonstration making wrong way. I don't know what I've done there, but anyway. So we had, parties each evening, social gatherings. We had a lovely time. This was another demonstration of Ruth Allen and her team from Melbourne. And this is John Rentians doing a demonstration with some of the techniques he uses for glass painting in his windows. This is Ruth Allen making a bowl. Working in teams. It was really great for the people of Poatina to see so much more than I can do. I'm not a great glass blower, but these people are just incredible with what they can do. We had another little exhibition I mentioned at the start of the kelp, and Auntie Lola Greeno's necklaces, and Andrea Spencer's beautiful seaweed forms as well, which I haven't got a photo of. Tom Moore, we had a whiskey tumbler making night one evening, so artists who had the skills just hopped up on the trailer and made a whiskey tumbler, and so we all enjoyed that, and we had fires to keep warm. It was just a lovely, lovely time. I even made one myself. You can see some of the little whiskey tumblers that were made that night, the next day after they've cooled. We had silversmithing workshops as well. We had kiln form glass demonstrations. This is Jeffrey Sarmiento from the current head of ANU's workshop. This is Scott Chaseling. I love that T-shirt. It really sums up how intense glass is. You just don't have time for anything else in your life. And that's a photo of everyone at the conference. And I'm going to leave you with a quote that Stephen Proctor, my first lecturer, gave just before he died in a lecture to, I'm sure you're all familiar with that quote, but the Scottish mountaineer. I think it's something that's stuck with me, and I often forget about that principle that once we commit to something and take the step of faith to try and achieve it, that a whole lot of other things unfold that you wouldn't have known were going to happen, that make it possible. And I think it harks back to that other quote from Paul Claudel that I quoted in my thesis. The point is to dare it. Finally, the point is to get going. And ultimately, the point is to believe in God. And whether or not you believe in God, I know for me, with my faith, it's recognising that I don't have all that I need to accomplish these things, and so it has to come from somewhere else, and I think that's part of the excitement and the thrill of creativity and going on a creative journey. I'll just leave you with one other quote that I haven't got a slide of, but a definition of creativity is the journey or movement between doubt and blockage to revelation and production. And I think that's been a really helpful one for me to realise it's normal to feel lost at the beginning of a creative project that's worth doing, or an artwork, or any creative endeavour. But eventually you find your way, and these other things come that make it possible. So I hope I haven't taken too long. Sorry, I didn't quite get to edit everything as much as I would like, but I hope you've enjoyed it.